I'm really happy to see everyone here. My name's Lynn Haney. I'm one of the librarians here, and we're really happy to see Kelly McHenry back. She's been gone. And if you haven't met her, stop and say hello at some point. She is coming. She's been gone all quarter. She's coming back in the spring, and she's really kind of the engine behind this series who got it started. Back when Occupy Seattle was at Seattle Central. I just have a quick question for you. How many of you have been to other talks in this series, either this quarter or other quarters? Oh, good. So we have a mix of people who've been here before and those who haven't. So today's topic is focusing on a book. Who has a book in hand right now? Right there. That's our copy, library copy. A couple other people have their own copies. It's called The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. And we have with us Carl Livingston, who is an instructor in political science, and Esther John, who's an instructor here in psychology. You're hiding over there? And Rachel Levy, who is a guest on campus with us today. She's a former public defender in Seattle and also a board member of Treatment Alternatives to Street Crimes. And so we're lucky today to have multiple perspectives, which is really one of the goals of doing these talks, is to have multiple perspectives, both from people at the front of the room and from you. And our goal in talking about these things is to have respectful conversations together, and then to also bring in other information. If this topic piques your interest, we have a lot of different books on related topics that you're welcome to take a look at and check out if you want to. And of course, the library is always available to you to look at more information. So I'm going to turn it over to Esther. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you so much, Lynn. Thanks for hosting us.
And we will get you chairs if you.
Everybody wants to just sit up here on this.
Well, we're on a tight schedule here because we've got plenty to do. We're going to see, I'm Esther John, Esther Little Dove John, and I teach psychology here at Seattle Central. And this week, my class, who most of them are here today, thanks everybody for turning out, we're studying social psychology. So we're going to see a videotape of the author, Michelle Alexander, talking about the book. This is the book, and it doesn't look that thick, right? But it is so dense with information. And there's emotional component to reading this book too, so it kind of slows you down, slows me down, maybe not all of us. So it's very handy that Rachel found a video of the author talking about the book, and she kind of lays out all of her research that she's done about how mass incarceration has crept up on us since the 1980s, the Reagan era. We're going to see the video, then I'm going to talk about the social psychological perspective and bring in some of the researchers that my class has been studying and talk a little bit about how that might tie in with this phenomenon of mass incarceration. Then Carl Livingston will talk about then Rachel Levy will talk about the legal perspective. And then Carl Livingston will take the political science perspective. Then we'll have open discussion. And the three of us, panelists, will only talk for three or 5 minutes. So we'll hope to leave enough time for everybody to get to talk. Well, not everybody, but for people to get to talk and have something to say. So let's get started with the video of Michelle Alexander speaking on Martin Luther King, the day after Martin Luther King's birthday today, this year, and after Obama's second inauguration. I'm hoping that this is going to be loud enough. Thanks for bringing the lights on. Okay, so this lays out most of Michelle Alexander's argument for how Jim Crow, the system of oppression of black people in the South, from the 1800s to the 1960s, certainly, how Jim Crow has been brought back into our society, and it's legal now to discriminate against people. And she has mentioned that it's not just black people, Latinos and Native Americans are in the same boat, that are denied the basic rights of American citizens once they have been charged with a drug crime and are considered felons. And so what I'd like to do now is to talk with you about the social psychological perspective on this. Because in her book she says, what if 50% of white men in a community were unable to vote, unable to get jobs, unable to get food assistance, unable to get shelter? What would happen? There would be a mass uprising against this injustice. But because it's happening to people who are black and brown, we think, oh, that's normal, or if we think about it at all. So if we don't think about it at all, how do we manage to not notice? How do we not notice this? So my class has been studying social psychology this week, and one of the things that we studied was the infamous Milgram experiment in the 1950s. In the 1950s, psychologists were wondering, how could people who were decent people, decent family, men and women in Germany commit some of the most brutal crimes ever committed in world history in the Nazi war camps, the Nazi detention camps, the concentration camps. So Stanley Milgram at Yale set up an experiment where he had psychologically normal men who were tricked into thinking that they were helping with a study of learning, and these men were told that they had to give increasingly high shocks, increasingly higher electrical shocks to other men whom they had met, whom they saw being strapped into a seat so that they couldn't get away from the electric shock that they were going to be administered. And they had to administer, they went into another room and couldn't see the victim, and they had to administer progressively higher shocks as the person who was supposedly strapped in a chair answered questions wrongly. And the experimenters knew that the person wasn't strapped into a chair, wasn't getting the shocks, but the experimental subject, the person who was supposed to be the teacher, was convinced that they were giving these progressively higher shocks. And a man in a lab coat was standing next to the so-called teachers, telling the teachers, when the teacher heard this person give a wrong answer, had to administer the shock, they kept telling the person, please continue, up until the level of death, level of shock to the person that they thought was sitting in that chair giving the wrong answers. 60% of the experimental subjects, 60% went all the way up to the point where someone would die with that level of shock. So if authorities tell you that you must do something, you might do some things that are morally reprehensible to you. Then in 1971, Philip Zimbardo did another experiment where he put regular college students on summer break into the position of being either prisoners or prison guards in the basement of the psychology building of Stanford University. And those students who were assigned to be prison guards became so abusive towards their fellow students who were designated as being prisoners, they had to stop this experiment in 6 days. They were expecting to go on for 3 weeks. They had to stop it in 6 days. So if people are given a mindset that the people that you're guarding are less than human, even if you know that they're not less than human, you could go into a situation where you're terribly abusive to those people. And then Jane Elliott who was a third grade teacher in Iowa in 1968 when Martin Luther King got shot. She wanted to teach her students what prejudice was. How could somebody shoot Martin Luther King, a king, like person of peace? So she assigned the students social status by separating the blue-eyed students from the brown-eyed students. And the first day that they did this experiment, the blue-eyed students were the ones that were on top. They could get seconds at the school cafeteria. They could go to recess and play outside while the brown-eyed students had to stay inside. They could, they were called smarter. They were praised more in the classroom. And by the end of the first day, those brown-eyed students were feeling miserable. Then the next day, the teacher switched it up. She said, I lied to you yesterday. It's actually brown-eyed students who are better than blue-eyed students. And she gave the same privileges to the brown-eyed students that had been denied them the day before on the basis of being brown-eyed, and the blue-eyed students were deprived. And at the end of the second day, the students were all surprised. They were third graders who were just normal, happy, thoughtful third grade students. That they were surprised that they could be so brutal to their other classmates just on the teacher's say-so, that people with brown eyes are worse, or people with blue eyes are worse. So in our society, and we also did what's called the implicit attribution test, where you see pictures flashed in front of you and you're supposed to associate different adjectives with these pictures. And we found that a number of us who thought we weren't biased were actually biased against people of color, African Americans. That's the test that we did. So what we saw in this talk illustrates the consequences, the real world consequences of prejudice, of bias that we have, that's mostly unconscious, many times unconscious, could be conscious, but many times unconscious. And that's how we can overlook the fact that black and brown people are getting shipped off to prison, are being denied their civil and social rights, because we, in part of our minds, we don't think that that's odd. We think that that's normal. So that's the social psychological perspective that I was going to give you today. Now Rachel, our lawyer has a perspective to give us today. We're hoping to leave some time for discussion.
Yeah, I do. So I'm going to be really, really short. I had probably more time, but I think the thing in terms of what the law is, why these things happen, I don't really know. But as a lawyer, even in Seattle, where everybody, really means well and processes everything, you see the same things. You see an unequal enforcement of the laws that are supposed to be neutral. It doesn't matter if the cops are black or white or whatever, but what happens is that you see more people in on drug charges. My own personal perspective is that drugs are a public health problem, not a criminal problem, in the same way that alcohol was. That seems to be borne out, as she says, with the statistics. The theory behind these enforcements is that non-white people commit more crimes than white people. It's not true. But nonetheless, what you see is the enforcement. And there are two reasons why. One is because the legal system allows what we call pretextual stops, which means that legally I'm not supposed to drive with this, okay? Because I have something on my arm right now. When the doctor told me this yesterday, I asked him if I could drive, and he said, well, legally you're not supposed to. And I said, what that means, if I were a young black male, I would be stopped by, he said, no, what he said was the police will stop you, can stop you if you're wearing this. I said, they're not gonna stop an old white woman. I'm not a young black male, so they're not gonna stop me. And that's the kind of thing that we see. The police are allowed to stop if they have some sort of feeling that something is wrong. And the fact that something is wrong is based more on the color of your skin than anything else. The other thing that I wanted to bring up really
was on the board of an organization called Treatment Alternatives to Street Crime. It was part of the legal system. It is no longer in existence. And what it would do would be to take people in who have been charged with drug crimes, because I think the system realizes that maybe drug crimes aren't really crimes. Although there is a greater percentage of non-white people who are busted than white people. Most of the people in the program were in fact white. But what was even more concerning to me was that the demands that were made on these folks were culturally inappropriate. Things like, at one point they were all required to have acupuncture, which was supposed to, somebody had decided that acupuncture is the way to get off of drugs. It may indeed work for some people, but when you require that and make that a condition of your probation, a lot of people are going to object to that, and that was seen as non-cooperation, not willing to be part of the program, not something that was worthy of sending somebody to jail. The other thing I think that I really wanted to emphasize is that a felony conviction is a very, very significant problem, and when it is for something like drugs, it still has the same consequences, and sometimes even harsher consequences, than a felony conviction for a crime of violence. Licensures, you can't be a hairdresser, there's a lot of medical profession that people would go into. Certainly law, stuff like massage therapy, all of those things require licenses that may very well not be allowed. The other thing that, again, she emphasized very much, and that Justice Scalia has also emphasized, is the right to vote. Felons in this state do not have the right to vote unless they go through a process. And it's very, very difficult to get your right to vote back. Supreme Court Justice Scalia, in a recent argument last week, said that he thought that the Voting Rights Act was an entitlement for non-white people. And the fact that we have a legal system that consider the right to vote not a right, but somehow something that you earn, is very, very concerning in terms of what the system does. So I've spoken longer than I intended to.
I have to really rush through this. I first want to say that I beseech you, I urge you, I beg you to help with the movement to stop this, and that your silence is not innocent, and your inactivity is complicit, and that every year that I am unable, despite my efforts thus far, to do the very thing that I'm asking for, which is a movement to stop this, stop the mass incarceration, but even beyond that, there's got to be more than just stopping the mass incarceration. You have to have a movement that actually brings contracts and jobs, remain in the capitalist world, contracts and jobs to this community. Then we just keep it going, and you know, I walk around here smiling. If you've had my class, you know I like to joke a lot, but I'm crying. I'm living this. I have a brother, my younger brother in prison now. 2 or 3 brothers that have crack problems. We deal with the police on a regular basis, and this is serious. And we need to start here. Washington State is one of the most institutionally racist places on the globe.
Word.
Washington State is one of the most institutionally racist places on the globe. In about 2010, 2 Supreme Court justices basically said that, and I need you guys to get this information, basically said that the reason, one at Yale University, in their election, in their campaign, one of them was in a campaign, the reason that African Americans are disproportionately incarcerated in the state of Washington is because they disproportionately commit more crimes. And it led to Nicole Gaines with the Lauren Miller Bar Association, the Black Bar Association, coming out with others supporting her, saying that that was just patently wrong. You can go get the article. That led to more people joining that discussion, and then it led to this. I was there at the Temple of Justice when this was reported. This is the preliminary report on race in Washington's criminal justice system from the Task Force on Race and the Criminal Justice System. This came out in 2011. I told you I was there when they reported on it. This has the most important legal minds in the state of Washington on it. And what they said was, Justice Sanders and the other judge, I think it was Justice Jones, you said?
Jim Johnson.
Jim Johnson started us on this dialogue, and we conclude the following. We found that the assertion attributed to then Justice Sanders that African Americans are overrepresented in the prison population because they committed a disproportionate number of crimes is a gross oversimplification. Many studies, in particular of Washington State criminal justice practicing institutions, find that race and ethnicity influence criminal justice outcomes over and above the commission rates. And so they said, we've reviewed research that focused on particular areas of Washington's criminal justice system and conclude that much of the disproportionality is explained by facially neutral policies that have racially disparate effects. And then they concluded that Washington State is institutionally racist. What also came out of it was the 1980 study. A 1980 study, or I'm sorry, it was about 82. That in 1980, of all states, Washington had the highest rate of disproportionate minority representation in its prisons in the country. So what ended up happening is, it caused more of the dots to come out. People forgot all about that. This study that came out in 2011. No one's talking about that. They're going to forget about that. No one's going to connect it all. And when they get done, we're going to be back at the same place. That these people are in the situation that they're in because of their greater criminality. It's about personal responsibility. I got to get on with my life. And so then you and I participate in keeping this stuff going. And when you're white, or when you can get the benefits of this, it actually probably helps you because you got an underclass that psychologically will make you feel like you're not them, so you have to feel a little bit better about yourself. I'm trying to mess with you now. Maybe they won't get your job when you see it like that. But I am trying to stir that human part of you that is trying to challenge you to be bigger and to be more concerned, not just about the animals. It kills me when I see people pouring water over wells and saving wells, but they don't care enough about these people. I'm concerned about wells too, but I'm even more concerned about the people. So I beseech you, I beg you. There's more I can say, but I have to stop. To be actively involved in a movement to stop this. And we've got to start it here.
So maybe we can do, I know some people might have 1 o'clock classes or things to do, so if you need to, we understand. But I also invite you, if you want to, comments or questions, and you want to talk about this more, to stick around and chat. Before anyone leaves, I wanted to let you know there's more sessions next quarter, Thursdays at 12 o'clock, and an opportunity to take a class that allows you to get credit for attending these discussions in social sciences 187. Kelly's teaching it, 5 credits, meets on Tuesdays and Thursdays.
Those have to leave. Others, if you stick around, you got 10, 15 minutes. I'm going to stay.
This is the last one for this quarter. We'll see you again in the spring.
I wanted to run something by Carl. seems to me significant that Michelle Alexander is on the bestseller list and she's getting lots of attention, and her book doesn't offer any suggestions. Angela Davis pointed all of this out 25 years ago, and she had a suggestion about how to solve it. Now, why are we all of a sudden excited about Michelle Alexander and her lack of suggestions, and we ignore Angela Davis and all of her very concrete suggestions?
Until Michelle Alexander, we really didn't have a good name for it and a good explanation of the complexities of this challenge. Her work is like dawning on and hitting us like Betty Friedan's work, The Problem That Had No Name, feminine mystique. Michelle Alexander is giving this message, and people are going, yes, I've been waiting for something like this. And so, if you can't see that, I don't know if I'll be able to really
No, that's what
get you to
Angela
see it.
Davis said it 25 years ago.
Can I say
Yeah,
something?
I don't think she did. I think that what the thing about Michelle Alexander that I think was most significant is that she talks about how the drug laws have created a very different system. It has always been a system of an underclass, but Angela Davis comes from the point of view of economics, which was something that until I read Michelle Alexander, I thought, yeah, right, that's really the reason why there are more African Americans or non-white people, because of economics. But what Michelle Alexander is saying is that it is much more racially biased as opposed to economically biased. And I think she is saying very clearly that you treat this as a public health problem and you recognize it. I don't think it's that different than what Angela Davis is saying, and Angela Davis had a lot of traction for a while, but she was a communist. And she was a very beautiful woman at a time when beautiful black women were not as well accepted as they are now. So that's part of it, but I think there is a very different approach that Michelle Alexander is taking.
Which is more comfortable to the ruling class.
So,
Possibly.
there was somebody right here.
And it was 25 years ago.
But,
And the fact that it was 25 years ago, I mean, we're gonna need something now that explains now, because we're in an argument dealing with people who are saying that racism, sexism, classism, they're just isolated incidents. Now, and the Supreme Court has said, if whatever program you're doing to fix racial disparities is based upon information from the 70s and before, or put it like this, it's not current, then you have no basis at all for challenging whatever are the current practices. So,
what were you going to say?
I was just gonna add, as far as Andrews and Michelle Alexander, personally looking at it, she did say about the economics, and that was 26 years ago, and nothing happened. So it seems to me everything was forgotten. Nobody wants to talk about it, and as far as the institution, as far as the incarceration, now in a different level of it. So I don't think there's any problem. Either she's getting attention and she's not getting attention, she's talking about it. As far as bringing back the dialogue, what's going on, that will help us change as far as incarceration and so many other things. Because it seems like we're just forgetting. It was 6 years ago, as far as Jim Crow, I don't know how long ago it was. So done with it, there's no slavery, nobody's been taken and given hard work, but we have institution kind of slavery. So I think there's nothing wrong talking about it so that we could have a dialogue, and that's the only way we could have change.
What were you gonna say?
Yes, originally, just before the speeches started, I, offered some information that I have here in terms of people who are involved and have responded community-wise in terms of making sure that offenders, get their voting rights back, which has been effective where the Supreme Court has been concerned, and the Court of Appeals, and they have been able to get at least 400,000 people get their voting rights back, and that's a significant number. Another thing I'd like to say is, I think we shouldn't get caught up in personalities about whether Dr. Martin Luther King made a more significant point about civil rights than Malcolm X did. The point is to try to bring about a conscientiousness, among the community for working together on an issue that affects all of us. And it would be counterproductive to just get engaged in who gave the best points in that regard. That we should concentrate on the human beings who this is affecting. And another point, as a ex-offender, an African American, and a citizen, is that I would be remiss without pointing out that we didn't get to that part in her lecture about the collusion of the government, in drug dealing. Like the article that was in the San Jose Mercury News back in the 80s, where they caught the government
Gary Webb
funneling money into the Crips and the Bloods and the Mexican mafia to support black ops in Nicaragua, in Afghanistan, and the same situation we had during the Vietnam War in Southeast Asia. Many of these drugs came here through black ops of the CIA and other organizations that for monies that they ordinarily could not be able to get legislated, to do the things that they were doing worldwide. So the government is not innocent in this situation of all these people being in prison for drugs. They worked in collusion and just as much had a hand in the mass incarceration for whatever their intent is, what she's talking about. So we have a responsibility there as citizens where our government is concerned, and not just because of the fact that so many African Americans are being incarcerated.
And let me say something on that too. If you want to read further what the gentleman's talking about, you want to get Gary Webb's work, Dark Alliance, the CIA, and cocaine, something like that. You also want to go get Alexander Cockburn and Jeremy St. Clair's book, Whiteout, which talked about what happened to Gary Webb after he did that and other things that weren't in Gary Webb's work. And then when you get Gary Webb's work, and remember, he was found dead, some people said with one bullet hole to the head. It was a suicide, it's the official report. Other people said with 2 bullet holes in the head.
Who's Gary Webb again?
Gary Webb is the San Jose Mercury News author that lost his job
That was a
because
journalist?
they tried to move him, journalist, they tried to move him to Cupertino, and he didn't want to move because he knew they were trying to put him out the pasture because they had gotten as much as they wanted, and San Jose Mercury News was taking big heat from this series. But in Gary Webb's report, he refers to the Biden Senate Select Subcommittee's hearings on the Iran-Contra affair stuff. And there's a attorney, a really brave, I can't think of this guy's name now, and he reveals the East Coast connection of this and issues a conclusion that's very, very interesting about the government's being complicit in the drug trade. And his conclusion is we gotta stop covert operations. Because whenever we get involved in covert operations, we're getting involved with entities that need to get the payoff, get paid back for what they're doing for us, so that we can do it with plausible deniability. And he's saying when we do that, we get in bed with drug traffickers and other people that are moving illegal weapons, illegal drugs, illegal precious metals, and all of that stuff, because they want to get that stuff back in the United States. It's a very interesting article, and those are some places to go to make out this case.
So Carl, I'm interested in your remarks about whale watchers, right? And I appreciate your remarks, but where I'm trying to go with this question is, don't you think that there's a possibility that this very, very important issue could end up like the whale watcher issue? In other words, it's just just one more thing that progressive-minded people are gonna work on. So what I'm trying to get at is, don't you think, when you tell us that we should be involved, and I agree with that, don't you think we need to be part of a decision that needs to be brought front and center to peace and justice issues all over the country? Right? In other words, you understand what I'm saying? I'm saying is that there's all kinds of things that people are working on in this country, right? You know, they're working on sweatshops, and they're working on whales, and they're working on this, right? Okay? And I got your point, but how do we build a movement around this issue and not just make it one little thing that some groups are working on? Doesn't it have to be front and center? Don't we really have to work on getting the public to acknowledge this on a nationwide basis?
You gotta start someplace.
I'm sorry,
You
go ahead.
gotta start someplace. I mean, you gotta start someplace.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, you can start, I'm gonna wait until it gets all international before you do something, or we can start right now. And one way you can start is in your classroom. Start raising people's consciousness in your classroom.
So what
do you wanna say?
Well, first of all, I would just like to say this young lady has had her hand up for a bit, but I want to comment. I want to comment on this gentleman's statement just a moment ago. It's interesting. I've been mulling over that same question, and recently there's been there's a lot of activism happening right here in Washington about environmental issues such as the trains of coal that are going to be coming through here. And I was with this group of people who were talking about this issue, and I had to think to myself, I had to ask myself, why don't I see a lot of black people at any of these gatherings of people kind of talking about these things? And on the one hand, like mass incarceration, like economic and social issues, is that black people, I think black people have more important and kind of closer to the chest issues to deal with before they can start tackling these broader things like animal rights and environmental issues. And this isn't true all across the board, obviously, but when just an everyday struggle is based around trying to find housing, food, jobs, and just being able to stand on some kind of solid ground, I'm not going to give a damn about the ozone layer, And it's not that my intentions aren't good, but if I can't worry about the roof over my head, why am I going to worry about the planet?
And whose hand was it that's been up?
Yeah, I have a question. I don't want to go too far off topic, but I wanted to know, where does the profit come in? Where does the money come in, and who gets it? Because I think once that connection is made, then people will open their eyes and see, okay, now I see why this is an issue, and not something that, because people might not, there's a lot of people who don't believe that racism is still an issue, but they see the money, they're gonna be like, okay, I see what's going on,
Yeah, this morning I was thinking, as I was riding the bus here, this morning I was thinking, why didn't I ask an economist to be on the panel? Because one of the big drivers of this is that prison industrial complex. The money, the big money, she talked about the beautiful big complexes, ultra-modern prisons, the contractors that build the prisons, the contractors that hire the wage earners that work in the prison are making big bucks off of this. And she did talk about the fact that the seizure of people's property is big money for the police department. So you're right, there's a big economic aspect to this. It's not just the psychological, not just the political, not just the legal, but the money. Where's the money?
There are two other things that go into that. One is that there are a lot of private prisons right now. So there's that money. And the other is the war in drugs is really, really, really well founded. They're taking money from what they call entitlements, but they're not taking any money from the war on drugs. And that has proven to be, the war on drugs has proven to be totally ineffective in terms of stopping drug traffic, in terms of educating children. None of the war on drug programs is effective in doing anything other than incarcerating more people, which is incredibly expensive. And I don't remember whether she said in this, but there are more people, percentages-wise, there are more people imprisoned in the United States than in any other country, except I think possibly North Korea.
No,
No.
even North.
Yeah.
We're number one.
And let me mention, that this is gonna be real quick. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I first wanted to answer the young black who will state the fact that there is no more slavery and that they indicated that this is not 1896 and the transportation of blacks out of Africa no longer exists. I just wanted to point out the fact that I believe in my heart that the shackles have simply been removed from our legs and placed in our minds. Also, too, I wanted to ask Dr. Livingston, what is the name of that book that was written by Gary Webb?
It's an article, and that's
Check these out. I think it's cocaine trafficking. Then you want to get Alexander Cockburn's, Jeremy St. Clair's Whiteout. And third, you want to get, I think the guy's name is Jack Blum, just came to me. Jack Blum's Senate Select Committee Hearing Report. They kept this thing all secret, really, until this came out. And then he went too far because he tried to prove they were actively complicit. The CIA is actively complicit. You don't have to go that far. You don't have to go that far. Don't try to hit a home run all the time. You just hit constant base hits and win the game. Just prove you knew and they didn't do anything about it. They knew and they didn't do anything about it. That's all you have to prove. He tried to prove they knew and they involved in it. Don't go that far. Just proving that they knew and they didn't do anything about it. The information about being complicit in it will sometimes come out and you'll be good to go. You could also check Representative Maxine Waters. She's from Compton. Her statements concerning Gary Webb's, this guy is Gary Webb. Gary Webb's book. She took the article in San Jose Mercury News, walked straight down to the wells of the House of Representatives and said, these are my people. And I'm going to stay here until we do something about it. But the Gingrich movement was still in power. They just shut it down. She took her own money to try to push that. Then he ends up with 2 bullet holes in the head. It just gets buried. No one does it. Yep.
There's some people that haven't had a chance to speak who've had their hands up.
I'd like.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead?
Okay, so what's this meeting about? I've got it. It's like
Oh.
one class. I just walked into this. So I haven't.
It's about the new Jim Crow, mass incarceration in the age of colorblindness. A
Okay,
book
so
that was written by Michelle Alexander.
What are we trying to accomplish here?
Well, so I'll talk to you afterwards,
You might
but
want
there
to
are
look at the
people
book.
who've been,
She didn't take it away.
yeah. Yes, go
We
ahead.
got one over in the corner.
Sir, I have a question about that. You said that Washington is the racist state in the globe. Do you have proof of this?
So, I said in 1980, now what I want you to do is I want you to go find this report. Find this report. This is the preliminary report of race and criminal justice, preliminary report on race in Washington's, state of Washington's criminal justice system. This is by the Task Force on Race and Criminal Justice. And that task force was made up. Let me tell you who was on the task force. Then you tell me. Participating organizations and institutions, the Administrative Office of the Courts, the American Civil Liberties Union in Washington, the Asian Bar Association of Washington, the Central Washington University Department of Law and Justice, the Defender Association on Racial Disparity Project, the Filipino Lawyers of Washington, the Fred Korematsu Center for Law and Equity at Seattle University, their main thing, law, Gonzaga University School of Law, the Korean Bar Association of Washington, the Latino Bar Association of Washington, the Lower Middle, that's the Black Bar Association of Washington, the Middle Eastern Legal Association of Washington, Mother Attorneys Mentoring Association of Washington, the Q Law, the LGBT Bar Association of Washington, the Seattle City Attorney's Office, the Seattle, do you want me to keep going? Okay. Okay. So what I'm telling you, it was the definitive report. We shouldn't even be having a discussion as to whether or not Washington is institutionally racist. It's settled. Now here's what's gonna happen. We ain't gonna do a DMN thing. Some of y'all gonna go get good jobs. Faculty members are gonna talk about this stuff and then talk about the environment and then talk about this. Nobody's gonna do anything. And 40 years from now, a report's gonna be written. All the dots will be connected then, and they're gonna wonder, what was wrong with these people? That they could allow people to live like this and not do, and not be, go to a little moment, you know, oh, that was really something. Yeah, that really moved me and leave. But do something about it to stop the mass incarceration of these folks. I can't scream enough. I can't. We have to get involved in a movement at all levels to help them. And the movement has to not just be about what she was talking about. The gentleman over there, I didn't want him to leave because I wanted to deal with what he was saying. She said he said she has no answer. She does. She said we got to stop the war on drugs. But to me, it's not enough of an answer. That's why I wrote this book, Shoestrings and Bootstraps, a development plan for Black America. Because unless we have a development plan for them, you will take away the thing that's forcing them in the pit. You pull them out of the pit, but they're just now on the ground floor. Unless we have another plan to help them get contracts and jobs and other things so that they can have a life, they're still not gonna make it. So that's why, to me, it's gotta be, so I was gonna read from my book to show that I had spoken about the mass incarceration. I just didn't call it that. What I said was not nearly as beautifully, as wise and cogent as what she said. That's why I took her work different places. But that's only one part of it. And you know, to me it just comes down to whether or not we even care enough. Do we care about these people like we care about whales?
No.
Really?
Do we care about these people like we care about whales? Do we care about what we care about the environment? These are people.
So, there's this gentleman here who's been waiting for a while.
I walk around all day ruminating to myself about all these political spectrums and ideas that we have going on in the nation. And it's nice to have a group that I can throw some of my thoughts on. My most pressing thought lately has been about this idea of democracy as the linchpin of the saving grace of this nation. Is it still relevant? You know, we're talking about this brother's talking about getting his voting rights back. Is that still a relevant issue for all of us as Americans, and even more relevant for African Americans? You know, these are the kind of thoughts that I'm having because I'm looking around the world and I read and I follow the news, and every nation is moving toward democracy, and I'm thinking, holy crap. Egypt moving toward democracy like ours. Afghanistan moving toward democracy like ours. And this is supposed to be the saving grace of the planet. Is this still a relevant idea? And my conclusion in my own head is, no, it's not. About Black people, this brother brought up, he's right about we have other concerning issues, but we need to leave that. I think every Black person should be in an organization of some sort. It could be the NAACP, it could be the Black Men's Association, it could be the Masons, it could be any organization. But we have to start being organized, in my opinion. One group. It could be the Christian organization. It could be anything you want to do, but we need to be an organization so we can start talking to each other. Because we pass each other here in Seattle and we don't acknowledge each other. And we can't even get a nod half the time. And those of us who are graced with a job, family, and fighting the struggle to hold that together, I still can't escape. I'm just ruminating. My last statement is this. I have Black children, and I don't know if you know this or not, but when you have Black male children, you don't sleep well, because any day, for no unseen reason, the police can knock at your door and bring you bad news. No other race of people in this nation has to wrestle with this idea every day. Every day I worry about it, because I love my children. And so that alone, that kind of pressure, I understand why we don't get involved in movement, because we're just trying to keep my sons alive until they get to be 30, and hopefully they're gonna spearhead a movement, but we have to show them the way. So it's a little bit of cowardice on our part, on my part. You know, I'm fearful. So that's it.
Can I say something to the democracy?
Fear is warranted.
I want you to know that if what you mean is democracy as we've seen it in the country for the most part,
Yeah.
then yeah, you're right. That might not be enough to really preserve the rights of all people, particularly African Americans. But if what you mean is democracy in a more complete sense, I'd just like you to look at what happened for African Americans from about 1868, really, to about 1880. For that brief period, when they had what we called the Reconstruction, it was amazing what a people did for themselves. When they could vote, they put people in office. They launched their own businesses. They went and found family members that had been enslaved and put their families back together. What they did was so beautiful that in Ida B. Wells' book on lynchings, she said, and you can catch it in a video that they have in the library on Ida B. Wells, A Passion for Justice, at the very end. When I get to this part, hey, I don't cry at a lot of things. I don't cry at a lot of funerals. But I have to fight the tears back when I hear her saying, as she was dying, when we're still in Jim Crow, she said, this book is dedicated to the young people that would, and I'm just gonna paraphrase now, that's gonna learn about what we did in our brief moment of freedom, about what people did to work and build their communities up, so that they would know what we tried to do for ourselves in the brief moments that we could, that we had to build ourselves up. Now, what did they do after that? Once they could get the troops out the way, they brought guns down to take that democracy away. So basically what I'm trying to tell you is, if you don't go for democracy, you're likely to get one of the other systems. Okay? And it's gonna be either aristocracy, that's the class people ruling. We've seen that. That's white people ruling or whatever. Exactly. It ain't democracy. That's why I'm saying don't leave democracy. Or you're going to get some other form, oligarchy, monarchy.
We have that.
So what I'm saying is, I think even history shows that you want to push it towards a true democracy with some power at the local level, so you can have it your way at the local level.
All right, you've been waiting so long.
Yeah, I just wanted to answer this lady's question that she asked. I just did a project for one of my classes. I don't want to mention which one, but we did a project on racism in the criminal justice system, and my portion of the project, which was a PowerPoint, about 5 minutes into Michelle Alexander's talk, I got shut down. That's one of the reasons I stayed a little longer. I have class, and I'll get ready to riot act by the time I get up there. But, I mean, to this day, and it was Tuesday. I don't know why, but it just so happened that, some of the material that I received for the class had her book in the material. So I decided to, buy the book from Amazon.com. And she does have remedies in there, because what she was saying in some of her lectures, she's done a lot of them, where she talking about there needs to be a grassroots effort. And that's why I brought that information about that grassroots effort that needs to evolve in the community for addressing an issue. But at the same time, my PowerPoint was to address that in terms of enlightening people how they could get actively involved in the light of the information that we've given them in the PowerPoint. But when we got to her,